Pastor for the beautiful opening prayer. And before we continue our discussion or start our discussion with the new topic under lesson 2, allow me to thank everyone for completing the assessment task last week. And I really love reading your discussion thread because you've been supporting one another in their talents and even in their skills and the things they do perfectly and things that they are they are slowly okay they are slowly doing uh, perfectly. There are those who got a perfect score of 20, and others got a good score but not a perfect score. But generally, allow me to share to you my feedback that I think most of you, or yeah, most of us or most of you, should really have to work hard, okay, improving your grammar, simple subject-verb agreement, simple use of singular nouns, singular and plural nouns, and others. Okay, so I hope that you would help train yourself, okay, in the use of English, in the use of English, and at the same time, refraining from committing any grammatical lapse or any grammatical error. So anyway, thank you still because you participated so well in the discussion thread. I have seen how you respected each other's sharing, how you contributed in the making of the discussion thread, and how you are learning. Okay, how you are learning from the discussions you had with your classmates. Okay, so before we go to the new lesson or new topic for lesson 2, may I request anyone from the class to just share a one sentence learning you had or you could still remember from previous discussion. If you're ready to share, then you just have to enable your microphone and you may share immediately. Okay? Anyone who's ready to share a sentence of what you have learned from the previous discussion? I think Jovins is ready. Jovins, please.
Sir, we discussed and even gave example about a test, non-test, assessment, and measurements.
Okay, so we discussed about these terms, these big concepts in lesson 2. Okay, that's a good sharing. At least you could still remember those big concepts, and I hope you could also differentiate, okay, those big concepts. Okay, any other sharing? Any other sharing? If your internet connection is intermittent, okay, then you make use of the chat box for you to encode your sharing. Yeah, I think Richard is ready. Chard?
Sir, we discussed the 9 types of assessment that can contribute or that that we should consider in order for us to evaluate our students, sir.
Okay, very good. So we made mention of 9 types of assessment. Okay, and these assessments have to be considered by teachers in order for them to objectively evaluate the students' understanding in our class. Okay, maybe listen to one more, please. One more sharer, please. Okay, since no one is responding, maybe listen to Charlemagne. Charlemagne?
Hello, sir.
Yes, please. Any sharing elements from last week's discussion?
Uh, as far as I can remember, sir, the difference between yung rubric sa criteria.
Okay, the difference between a rubric and a criteria. So what's the difference,
Yeah.
Charlemagne? Charlemagne, may we see your
Uh,
paper?
yes, sir.
So what's the difference?
Sir, is criteria is just part of rubric, I think, sir.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Then
And
criteria is
yan,
just a
sir.
part of the rubric. Okay, so meaning to say a rubric is broader than a criteria. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Charlemagne. Charlemagne, next time ha, hindi ka dyan fondo sa klase ha.
Sige, sir.
Okay. Thank
Sige,
you,
sir.
Charlemagne. Okay, so that's it. That's also a good sign that that's a good sign. You please mute your microphone now. That's a good sign that indeed you have learned something from our previous discussion, and that's a good sign also that you are actually helping yourself. Okay, learn things in our course. Okay, so um, as I have said, every time that I would ask you questions, okay, during our conference or during our video conference, please do not be too hesitant to share your thoughts, your insights, because this is a kind of assessment too. Okay, we are calling students, teachers are calling students to recite in class. Teachers are asking questions during discussion because they would like to make students' thinking visible. And to make your thinking visible, it's only through sharing your thoughts, sharing your insights, or sharing your ideas about the topic under study that you could be able to show that indeed you are contributing to the classroom discussion. Okay, so thank you again, Richard, Charlemagne, and Jovin for sharing your understanding from last meeting's discussion. Now we proceed now to the next topic under lesson 2, and that is a detailed discussion of the different forms the different forms of assessment. So allow me to share this window. Okay. So for the second part or last part of our lesson for lesson 2 or last topic of lesson 2, we will now be dealing with the different forms of assessment. And these forms of assessment are the following: assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. It is very important that teachers have to understand what assessment is, what classroom assessment is, because it's through this that teachers, okay, the teachers the teachers are are transforming from being the knowledge bearers to knowledge guides of our students. This is similar with our comparison of of a traditional classroom and that of a 21st century classroom. We said that teachers in the conventional classroom are the sage on the stage, meaning to say they provide information. They are there to fill in the empty vessel, the empty tablet, or the blank tablet of the students. Okay? But in the 21st century teaching and learning, we said that teachers are no longer knowledge bearers. They are no longer stage on a stage because of the because of the instantaneous sharing of information and because of the readily available information through the internet. Teachers would no longer be such, but rather teachers are now knowledge guides or guides by the side of our learners. And we can only be that in the 21st century as teachers if we make use of assessment so well, if we integrate effective use of different assessment tasks. And for this lesson, we will be making use of the three-part assessment model as proposed by Dr. Rhonda Jubek. Okay, so this is Dr. Rhonda Jubek. He's a curricularist and a known educator in America or instructional manager in the United States of America. She presented the different forms of assessment and how are these forms of assessment are supposed to be distinguished from one another. So, in this lesson, we will start first with a passage from Dylan Williams in his book, Embedding Formative Assessment, a Practical Techniques for K-12 Classrooms. He said, most of what our students need to know has not been discovered or invented yet. Learning how to learn used to be an optional extra in education. Today, it's a survival skill. This passage by Dylan Williams will remind us of, of a shift from the what's of learning to how's of learning. Gone were those days that we just provide students what to learn or our learners of what they are supposed to learn. But in the 21st century, we are supposed we are supposed to provide them the skills on how to learn. And this is a survival skill in today's world. Because please take note that the world today is fast changing. Okay, the world today is fast changing. Hence, we have to be very flexible enough to adapt to new things, to adapt to challenges and opportunities that life may offer. And we can only do that if we have this skill this skill on learning how to learn. Okay, so this is a good start for our passage, and this should guide every teacher as an assessor inside the classroom. That our primordial goal to teaching and learning is for our students to know how to learn. Not just knowing what to learn, but to know how to learn. Paano matuto o hindi lamang kung ano ang dapat matutunan, kundi kung paano dapat matutunan ang mga bagay-bagay. That would also mean that we are helping them develop as self-directed learners or independent learners. Now, in today's discussion, the following are the different parts of our. We will be looking into the differences of these forms of assessment. First is on their definition. For this part, we will answer what is assessment for, as, and of learning. Then after that, we will also be looking into the purpose of each of the forms of this assessment. And we answer this question, why do we assess or why assess? And number 3 is, we will also be looking into the scope of doing assessment for, as, and of learning. Hence this question, what to assess? Then the fourth one is the methodology, and the methodology answers the question how to assess. Then we also have the fifth one on quality, how to ensure that assessment is of value, that each of these forms of assessment, okay, is of value. Then number 6 is utilization, how to use the assessment information. And number 7, role, what functions should teachers do when they do each of these forms of assessment. And last, we identify some strategies to answer this question, what are examples of assessment tasks? So these are the 8 elements that we will be exploring to finally distinguish, to finally compare and contrast what is assessment of learning, what is assessment for learning, and what is assessment as learning. Again, a passage from Dylan Williams in his book, Embedded Formative Assessment, okay, made mention of this passage, that feedback functions formatively only if the information fed back to the learner is used by the learner in improving performance. If you observe, I don't give quiz. Okay, I don't give quiz unless I check all the previous activities you did in our class. because that's the purpose of doing assessment. That's the purpose of doing feedback. The scores you have gained, you have earned in the different learning tasks, okay, would actually give you a lesson, would actually help you assess whether you have learned something from these learning activities, which have prepared you prior taking the summative assessment or prior taking the quiz. And that's how important feedback is. It's only through feedback that we can actually improve our skills, we can actually improve the way we learn. And I think I have seen this in your discussion thread, or I have read this in your discussion thread in your previous learning task. I've seen how you learned that you said that feedback from people or comments from people or suggestions from people help you improve the skill that you love doing or the talent that you are passionate with. Okay, so that is the meaning of that passage. Okay, we continue our discussion. The first one, we proceed to the definition of these forms of assessment. So, we define assessment for, assessment as, and assessment of learning. Assessment for learning is defined as this. This form of assessment provides the basis for providing descriptive feedback for students and deciding on groupings, instructional strategies, and resources. So meaning to say, our instructional strategies in class, our instructional strategies that we use to discuss a certain unit of study or a topic under study are actually considered as assessment for learning. Because the instruction we do for our students would actually help them prepare for the bigger assessment, and that is what we call as tests, major exams, or quiz. And when we say descriptive feedback, we mean to say that we just not merely provide our students a score, a rating after they have completed a learning task, but rather we provide them reasons why they got such a score, why they got such rating. So that is descriptive feedback. Because if you would just provide them the score, that is evaluative or evaluative feedback. But if we provide them the score at the same time, the reason why they have been given such a score or such rating, then we are actually making use of descriptive feedback or constructive feedback, and that is an example of assessment for learning. Next is assessment as learning. Assessment as learning, okay, is defined as this. That is, it is through this process that students are able to learn about themselves as learners and become aware of how they learn, become metacognitive knowledge of one's own thought processes. So assessment as learning is about self-assessment. It's about teaching students or teaching learners on how they are supposed to assess themselves, to assess their learning ability, to assess how they learn in a certain course, in a certain subject, so that they would know how to improve themselves and so that they would know how they think as they think. That is thinking about thinking, that is metacognition. Okay? And this is what we call assessment as learning. The last form is assessment of learning. It is the assessment that becomes public and results in statements or symbols about how well students are learning. It often contributes to pivotal decisions that will affect students' future. Meaning to say, this is already the final assessment task. It's final because we are to make their scores, their rating in statements or symbols. Statements would mean it's very good, outstanding, excellent performance. symbols would mean whether numerical or whether letter symbols in others, A plus, A negative, A, B positive in others, or 95, 98, 99, 85 and others, or 75. These are all symbols. And these are to quantify. Okay, so assessment of learning is about quantifying students' understanding, quantifying students' learning. Okay, so looking at the different forms of assessment, then we would say that and in reference with the previous discussion, then we could say that assessment for learning refers to formative assessment. It's formative assessment. Assessment as learning refers to ipsative assessment or self-assessment, while assessment of learning refers to summative assessment. Okay? So these are the different forms of assessment. Now allow me to stop sharing this slide and we proceed to the question and answer, because you might want to ask questions as regards the differences based on its definition of these three forms of assessment. Any question? Any question? Okay. No one is asking a question. Now we continue our discussion. Okay, look at this. Okay, so we're done with the definition. We proceed with this passage by Dylan Williams. This is Dylan Williams in his book, Embedded Formative Assessment. He said, the first fundamental principle of effective classroom feedback is that feedback should be more work for the recipient than the donor. And who's the donor? He's referring here, the teacher. It's the teacher giving feedback. And who's the recipient of feedback? It's the learners. The recipient of the feedback are the learners. And since learners are the recipient of the feedback, then that would mean that our feedback should be something that would help our learners improve the way they learn. Okay? So that's a passage from Dylan Williams. Now, we proceed to the purpose of each of these forms of assessment. Why assess? Why do we have to assess using these forms of assessment? Assessment for learning's purpose is this: to enable teachers to determine next steps in advancing student learning. So assessment for learning or formative assessment are used by teachers so for them to identify necessary or important steps or important feed-forward steps, so for them to advance student academic progress or student learning progress. So mean to say, the activities should be something, or the learning task should be something that would contribute to further students' learning, to further or advance students' understanding. That is always the purpose why we do formative assessment. Formative because we do formation. Formative because we are actually helping them learn the lessons better. And learning better would mean advancing their understanding, furthering their understanding, broadening or even deepening their understanding about the topic under study. Okay? Next is, how about assessment as learning? The purpose of assessment as learning is this: to guide and provide opportunities for each student to monitor and critically reflect on his or her learning and identify next steps. If it's teachers who are doing the next steps, if it's teachers who are determining the next steps using assessment for learning, assessment as learning would give students the chance to monitor, to critically reflect on their own learning so that they could identify next steps or next strategies for them to improve their own learning. Okay? Assessment as learning. How about assessment of learning? The purpose why we do summative assessment is for us to certify or inform others of students' proficiency in relation to curriculum learning outcomes. The purpose of summative assessment then is for us to provide an evidence that truly our students have achieved, okay, the intended learning outcomes, the instructional learning outcomes, the course learning outcomes, the curriculum learning outcomes. Have they achieved the outcomes? And if they achieve the outcomes, then that would mean that we are successful in giving them assessment for learning and in providing them assessment as learning. And it's because of this that students' academic progress has improved. So, again, assessment for learning is teachers' identification of the next steps for them to advance or further student learning. Assessment as learning is to guide and provide students the opportunity to monitor their own learning, to reflect about their own learning so that they would identify new strategies to improve the way they learn. And assessment of learning is something that would certify, okay, that would provide evidences that would testify how students are proficient or how students have achieved, okay, the learning outcomes. Then another passage from Dylan William, okay, from Dylan William in his book, Embedding Formative Assessment, Practical Techniques for K-12 Classrooms, okay, and the passage goes like this. The shorter the time interval between eliciting the evidence and using it to improve instruction, the bigger the likely impact on learning. What is the meaning of this? That scores, that feedback to be given to students should be given with timeliness. Okay? Should be given with timeliness. Dapat pag nagpasa ang estudyante ng mga gawain pagkatuto, ang guro ay kaagad niyang itatama ang mga ito, kaagad niyang iwawasto ang mga ito, nang sa ganun ay may bigay sa tamang oras sa mga estudyante ang resulta ng kanilang gawain pagkatuto at dahil sa resulta nakabatay ang kanilang pamamaraan para lalo pa nilang malinang kanilang pag-unawa sa nasabing paksa na tinatalakay sa nasabing kurso. Okay? So it would always be good that as teachers, we provide feedback. We provide scores of our students in their completed learning tasks timely. Because the scores, the feedback would help them reflect on their own learning and would help them identify also the next steps for them to improve their understanding. Yan po ang ibig sabihin ni Dylan William sa kanyang sinabi that the shorter the time interval between eliciting the evidence and using it to improve instruction, the bigger the likely impact on learning. Kaya nga, hindi ka pwedeng magpa-quiz, magpa-summative assessment hanggat hindi mo na-check lahat ng mga previous tasks, lahat ng mga previous learning tasks, because it's only through this assessment that students would know how to improve the next time that they would learn the material. Now we proceed to the next one, the scope of these assessment forms. What to assess? For assessment for learning, we assess students' progress and learning needs in relation to curricular outcomes. How do they progress? That is, how do they progress and what are their needs? Okay, that is what we are to assess when we use assessment for learning. To check students' progress using assessment for learning, that would mean that we are making use of instructional strategies. We make use of the art of questioning while we do instruction so that we can assess, so that we would know how they are progressing as they are to understand the lessons in class. And when we say assessing learning needs, we are doing diagnostic assessment. Because we cannot start discussing the lesson unless we know where our students are coming from, unless we know students' prior understanding students' previous knowledge about the topic that we are about to discuss to them. But checking their needs, checking their prior knowledge, gauging their progress, okay, should always be in accordance with the learning outcomes, with the curricular outcomes. Learning outcomes are very important. That's why in the next chapter, in the next lesson, in the lesson 3 of our course, we will be discussing about writing effective or writing good learning outcomes. We will be dealing on that the next time, the first lesson for midterm. How about for assessment as learning? What to assess? Student thinking about his or her learning. Okay? We assess student thinking about his or her learning. We will identify how students think about their own understanding, about the way they think, and about the way they learn in our class. And also, for assessment as learning, we assess strategies a student uses to support or challenge learning. For example, strategies, di ba? Sometimes students would make use of note taking as a strategy to support their own learning, to support or challenge their own learning. Sometimes the students would record the discussion and they would listen to the recorded discussion later at home. That is also a strategy of a student. Well, when I was a student, my strategy is like this. I would usually sit, if it's a face-to-face classroom, in a face-to-face learning, I would usually sit in front of the class, not at the first row, but I usually sit at the third row, at the center aisle, okay, so that I could easily see the teacher. I could see the expression, the facial expression of the teacher while she or he is discussing the lesson, and I could also easily see the writings on the board, okay, just that. Then I don't take down notes because I don't take down notes because I hate writing. But I just have to be very keen on the things the teachers are writing on the board and the facial expression of the teacher. Then later on during the quiz or during the assessment, I would remember the facial expression of the teacher when that concept is being mentioned, when that theory is being mentioned. That's how I learn. I am a highly visual learner. Okay. Aside from strategies and thinking, we assess mechanisms a student uses to adjust on learning. How will they adjust their learning? How will they be very flexible towards their learning? These are mechanisms that we are referring to. For assessment of learning, we assess extent to which a student can apply the key concepts, knowledge, skills, and attitudes related to the curriculum outcome. So it's already about the application of what they have learned. The application of the concepts and theories they have learned after we discussed the lesson, after we did after we did assessment as learning. So it's about the level of application, the level of applying these key concepts, these big ideas in our lesson into real life scenarios or real life situations. That is the scope of assessment of learning. Another passage from Dylan Williams is this. The greatest impact on learning is the daily lived experiences of students in classrooms. And that is determined much more by how teachers teach than by what they teach. How do we teach? This has always been a question that we have to ask ourselves as teachers or as future teachers, you as future teachers. You know, our daily lived the daily lived experience of our students in our classrooms is being gauged by how we teach them. Okay? Kung paano tayo nagtuturo sa kanila. Okay? Kung paano natin itinuturo ang mga paksang aralin. Kung paano natin binibigyan sila ng mga gawain pagkatuto at kung paano natin sila ginagabayan para lalo pang matuto sa ating silid-aralan. That is that is supposed to be the way we measure daily lived experiences of our students in class. So that is quality experience, quality learning experience of our students inside our classroom. And it's measured by how we teach them, not by what we teach them. Okay? Next is we proceed to method. How to assess using these forms of assessment. For assessment for learning, okay, a range of methods in different modes that make students' skill and understanding visible. And how do we make their skills and understanding visible? By not allowing them to talk inside our class, by not allowing them to do, not permitting them to do learning conversations. No, it's only through engaging them into learning conversations, into discussion threads for online learning, and even into the art of questioning that we can actually make their understanding, their thinking visible. Okay? So do not complain if teachers, if your teachers have been asking you to do or to complete worksheets, to complete templates, to do this and to do that, to answer questions, to share your insights, to share your reflections and others, because these are ways that teachers are making your understanding visible. It's only through sharing your insights that you could be understood by your teachers. This is assessment for learning. How about assessment as learning? A range of methods in different modes that elicit students' learning and metacognitive process. It's about asking our students or learning about how each of our students are doing their own style towards learning better the lesson, towards better learning of the lesson. It's always good that we have to learn or we have to know our students individually, especially their own learning styles. Because knowing their learning styles would allow us integrate, would allow us use or employ differentiated instruction addressing student diversity inside our classroom. This is assessment as learning. How about assessment of learning? It's a range of methods in different modes that assess both product and process. The ultimate, this is already the culmination of learning by our students. And the culmination is by checking, by assessing their product, their learning product, and the learning process. What's the difference between a product and a process? Product is a tangible evidence of learning. A process is a demonstration on how they learn. Ito ang pagkaiba ng dalawa, okay? Pag sinabi natin produkto at proseso. Produktong pagkatuto, prosesong pagkatuto. Pag sinabi ng produktong pagkatuto, ito yung mga ebidensya ng pagkatuto na nahahawakan, ebidensya ng pagkatuto na pwedeng mabigyan ng score, pwedeng mabigyan ng rating. Pag sinabi natin namang prosesong pagkatuto, this is the demonstration on how they are supposed to apply things that they have learned, big ideas, big concepts, theories that they have learned in our lesson. So these are the differences among these forms of assessment when it comes to what they assess on how they are supposed to be used as an assessment tool. Okay? Then a passage from Ron Richard. Okay? Ron Richard in his book, Creating Cultures of Thinking, the 8 Forces We Must Master to Truly Transform Our Schools. Sabi niya dyan, every child deserves a champion. And who's this champion? A champion is an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. This is a good passage by Richard, because it would remind us that as teachers, we should always be the number one fan of our students. We should always be believers of our students. That as teachers, as an adult inside the class, okay, we should never give up on our students. That even if our students are learning in a slow pace, and we should just be there guiding them, we should just be there believing in them that they could do something more, that they could actually progress in their academics, that they can actually advance their understanding, that they can actually pass our subject. And that is what I've been telling you before. That is how we do good expectations from our students. If we do have high expectations of them, then that would mean that we value them, we trust them that they could learn in our class. We trust them that they could pass our subject. And we can only do that if we have that powerful connection with our students. And we said a while ago that only through knowing how they learn, knowing their learning styles, that we can build this powerful connection with them. And to always believe, should I say, that they would certainly become the best version of themselves as possibly as they do. Okay, that this is a good passage from Ron Richard. Next is on quality, how to ensure that assessment is of value. Okay. Paano natin makita? Paano natin mapatunayan na ang pagtatasa na ginagawa natin ay mayroong kalidad? For assessment for learning, okay, there should be accuracy and consistency of observations and interpretations of student learning. Ano ibig sabihin nito? We have to be very consistent providing or feeding back our observations and our interpretations of what we have observed about our students to our students. Dapat regular tayo nagbibigay ng feedback. Dapat regular tayo na nagbibigay ng timely feedback. Okay? And there should be clear, detailed learning expectations. This is the very first thing that we have to tell our students prior discussing a new unit of study or a lesson. We have to set a clear and detailed expectations of them. We have to communicate our expectations of them. Okay? There should be accurate, detailed notes for descriptive feedback to each student. Okay? So we have to provide them this constructive feedback. Okay? We have to provide them constructive feedback or descriptive feedback for them to know why they got good scores and why they got a not so good score. If they got a good score, then that would remind them, now I know what to do the next time. So for me to sustain this good score. If they got not so good score, then the students would say, and because there's a description why they got that not so good score, then the students might reflect that, oh, I have to improve this part because my teacher mentioned that this score, that I earned this score because I failed to do this and I failed to do that. And then maybe next time I have to make sure that I will not fail doing this. The next time that my teacher would ask me to do this task. Okay? So that is assessment for learning. How about assessment as learning? There should be accurate and consistent student self-reflection, self-monitoring, and self-adjustment. You know, it is also good that, you know, I remember when I was teaching educational technology, okay, educational technology, I would actually, when my students submit their output for the first time, I'll check it. I'll provide descriptive feedback. No scores yet, but I just provide them the descriptive feedback, the constructive feedback. Then after that, I return their output to them, and I would allow them to improve their output based on my descriptive feedback. The second passing of the output is already the graded learning output. Because that is one way to at least provide a chance for students to improve their output based on the descriptive feedback or constructive feedback you have given them. It may be too tedious. It may be tedious doing that, but I think it would help our learners to learn better, to achieve more in our class. Okay? Self-adjustment. That is what we call a self-adjustment. Next is engagement of the student in considering challenging his or her thinking. Okay? Kaya nga maganda na while they are doing, for example, while students are working on a certain learning task, As a teacher, you roam around the classroom, you talk to every student, you ask them how they are doing, kumustahin mo naman sila kung kumusta na ang kanilang ginagawa, kumustahin mo kung nasaan na sila sa kanilang ginagawa, because that's one way. Okay, that's one way to ensure that they are engaged in the learning process. Students record their own learning. Okay? Later on, titignan natin yung halimbawa ng assessment as learning. For example, yung learning lab. You require them, you ask them, you motivate them to make use of a simple notebook, for example, instead of doing the Islam book and Islam book and others. Ask them to make use of the student diary or to make use of a learning diary or learning log or learning journal for them to record a learning that they would never forget every time that they would meet or every time that they would participate in a topic under study. This is assessment as learning. How about assessment of learning? There should be accurate, consistent, and fair judgment based on high quality information. All the summative assessments that we do should be judged or should be evaluated objectively by teachers. And we can only do that if we provide clear rubrics for our students. And I suggest that for summative assessment, for performance assessment, summative assessment, okay, the rubric that is supposed to be used are analytic rubrics. Because this way, we can actually, the analytic rubric is highly objective when it comes to evaluating or assigning score to our students' output, to our students' completed learning. Why? Kasi nga, this kind of rubric has a number of indicators or success indicators or success criteria, then at the same time, each of these indicators are broken down into specific scoring guides, into specific descriptive, indicator descriptions and others. Yung 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, good, fair, poor, good, very good, and others. Okay? Mas maging objective, mas maging objektibo ang ating pagbibigay ng score, pagbibigay ng rating sa ating mga estudyante. There should be clear and detailed learning expectations. Why? Bakit pumasok naman sa learning expectations dito? Because we will check whether the learning expectations here have been achieved during the summative assessment or not. And there should be fair and accurate summative reporting. Dapat accurate yung nire-report natin ng mga scores, ng mga ratings ng ating mga estudyante. Richard said this, that not our expectations of students, but our expectations for students. Okay ba to? Expectations of students, so correct me if I'm wrong, no? Kasi nasabi ko expectation of students, but rather it is expectations for students. What do we expect for them? Is different from what do we expect of them. What do we expect of them is quite, I think this is the difference. What do we expect of them is quite prescriptive. Because it's just us expecting something for them to do such expectation. But when we say expectations for students, everything that we deem that our students would do is something for their benefit. It's something for their progress. It's something for their advancement. Okay? So for starting today, we have to say not expectations. What do I expect of my students, but rather what do I expect for my students? This is a good sharing from Ron Richard. In his 8 courses we must master to truly transform our schools. Again, not our expectations of our students, but it should be our expectations for them. Next, we proceed to the next one, utilization. How about utilization? It answers the question, how to use the assessment information. We're done with assessment, and an information has been provided out from this assessment. And how should we make use of the information? For assessment for learning, Provide each student with accurate descriptive feedback to further his or her learning. We provide them the feedback. For assessment as learning, provide each student with an accurate descriptive feedback that will help him or her develop independent learning habits, independent study of lessons, independent learning habits, and have each student focus on the task or and his or her learning, not on getting the right answer. We have to teach these students this skill. Not for them to focus on getting the right answer, but to focus that they are on task, that they are well engaged, and that they are aware of the way they learn inside our class. For assessment of learning, indicate each student's level of understanding, a level of proficiency vis-a-vis the learning outcomes, and provide the foundation for discussions on placement or promotion. Placement is what we call now the bigger test, okay, yung major exams and others. We provide them the foundation. The summative assessment, we provide them the foundation towards getting good grades, good scores in placement or major exams. For assessment for learning, we have to differentiate instruction by continually checking where each student is in relation to the curricular outcomes. Differentiate instruction. And we can only do that if we continually look into whether our students are already performing, whether our students are already engaged in our class in relation to the achievement of the learning outcomes. Next is for assessment as learning, provide each student with ideas for adjusting, rethinking, and articulating his or her learning. Kaya dito pumapasok si teacher-initiated conference or student-initiated conference. Kung sa teacher-initiated, we talk to each student, academic counseling, okay, so for them to process their students' understanding, so for us to provide ideas, for students to rethink of their own learning, for students to articulate how they learn in others, to share how they learn in others to us, or we allow them to freely see us. We have to be accommodating enough. We have to accommodate them if they would like to see us and discuss matters about their learning to us. Okay, that is assessment as learning. We provide the conditions for the teacher and the student to discuss alternatives. Okay, ito yung yung sinasabi natin na when we discuss with the students, we not just require them or prescribe them of a certain strategy, but rather we allow them to share, okay, to share their ideas as regards to alternatives, so for them to understand our lesson. And the students report about their learning. You know, in my class before, in EdTech before, I usually ask the students to see me every time that they would encounter a problem with regards doing their learning portfolio. So they would see me, they would report to me their progress, okay, and I would also help them to progress more as they are to complete the main requirement of the course, their project in the said course. Okay, so I would usually tell them do that. You have to regularly report to me what is happening to your work, what is happening to your requirement. I hope that you already have started watching all the tutorials about assessment, instructional planning with assessment as your requirement in this course. Ito, Grant Wiggins, the proponent and father of backwards design, said, "What makes any assessment in education formative is not merely that it precedes summative assessment, but that the performer has opportunities, if results are less than optimal, to reshape the performance to better achieve the goal." The goal that we are referring here is the end of learning, and the end of learning is the achievement of learning outcomes. That's the purpose of assessment. Assessment is actually giving learners the chances, the opportunities to reshape their understanding, to reshape the way they perform in our class, to reshape the way they demonstrate the theories and concepts they have learned in our class. And reshaping is towards achieving the learning outcome. That is according to Grant Wiggins, the father of backwards design, or understanding by design. Okay? Now we pause for a while, okay, and we proceed to question and answer. Kayo po ba ay nasa klase pa rin ba? Okay, pwede na po kayong magtanong kung meron kayong mga kalituan. okay, na gustong linawin, okay, ito na ang pagkakataon ninyo para linawin ang mga bagay-bagay. Tandaan po ninyo na ang inyong pagtatanong ay napakahalagang proseso ng inyong pagkatuto. Dahil sa pamamagitan lamang ng pagtatanong ng inyong mga classificatory questions para lalo pa ninyo mapag-igting ang inyong kaalaman, okay, mapalawak at mapalalim inyong kaalaman tungkol sa pagtatasa o tungkol sa ating talakayan. Any question now, please? Hello? If your connection is intermittent or slow, please make use of the chat box for you to address your question or for you to ask your questions or share your insights as regards our discussion. Any question? Brenda?
Sir, good morning po.
Good morning. Brenda, may tanong ka dito.
Sir, for example po, yung isang subject, tapos yung in a one sem, sir, parang i-discuss muna niya lahat-lahat yung yung subject, sir. Tapos at the end of ano, sir, doon na lang siya magbibigay ng assessment for the whole na diniscuss niya, sir. Is that possible, sir?
Kung sobrang haba
Isang
ng
assessment lang po.
isang assessment lang. Kung sobrang haba ng talakayan, bago ko magbigay ng isang assessment, that one assessment would no longer be helpful to prepare students for the quiz, to prepare students for a bigger test or bigger assessment or for the summative assessment. You know, we have to understand that our learners, in the psychology of Filipino learners, or even in child and adolescent development, in educational psychology, if topics are too broad, okay, if topics are too broad, if topics are too long, for example, then these topics have to be chunked, okay, have to be fragmented, have to be divided into parts, okay, para nang sa ganun mas madaling aralin ng mga estudyante. Kaya mas maganda sana na for example, bawat topic o kaya bawat malalaking unit of study, dapat hindi lang isang assessment, isang pagtatasa ang gagawin ng isang estudyante, hindi lamang isang gawain pagkatuto ang gagawin to prepare them for the quiz. But there should be more assessment activities. Maliban kung during the discussion, okay, the teacher made use of an open forum or a question and answer portion for you to clarify concepts. That would be good because question and answer, okay, is an assessment itself, is an assessment task itself. Okay, but ideally, that should not happen. Ideally, for long topics, for long chapters of study, okay, this chapter has to be chunked into pieces. So each piece will be easily learned by learners. Will be easily understood by learners. Okay, Brenda?
Sir, so hindi mame-measure yung learnings ng student kapag iisang assessment lang yung gagawin ng teacher in one whole sem, sir?
Mami-measure pa rin siya, pero malamang ang measurement niya ay hindi ganun ka-significant. Okay? Kasi masyadong mahaba yung lesson. Okay, kaya nga advisable na mag-divide siya into parts. Okay, nang sa ganon, mas reliable itong measurement, mas reliable yung score estudyante later during the summative quiz or summative assessment.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Brenda, for that wonderful question. Jovin?
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, okay, sir. Contrary to what are the definition of what are the definitions under the assessment for learning, sir? Sir, you've mentioned that assessment for learning is student progress. We talk about student progress and the wait, sir. To certify or inform others of students' proficiency, sir. So, as this is only an observation, sir. Okay. Contrary to what we defined assessment for learning, sir. Parang parang bias siya kasi sir, for instance, meron tayong mixed assessment of multiple choice and essay.
Oo.
So students parang nakakuha siya kasi ng low score dun sa multiple choice. And teacher have decided that kahit hindi niya na binabasa yun, sir, parang kukunin na lang yun as perfect score to pass the student, sir. So how can we say that
Yung sa essay, yung sa essay.
okay, opo, sir, kasi pinerfect niya yung essay without reading kasi nga, sir,
Para pumasa yung estudyante.
low score multiple choice, sir. So, is that a justifiable for assessment for learning?
No, certainly no. Okay, why should you perfect the student in the essay part because you know that he's already failing? That is not a good practice because we cannot actually help the student learn because we are just doing something. We are doing an unfair practice just to pass the student. Well, in fact, the student is supposed to be failed in that assessment. So we should never
Okay,
do
sir.
that. As teachers, we should never do that. You know, ito yung sinasabi ko na hindi porke gusto lang natin ipasama ang estudyante, kaya medyo unfair na yung practice natin when it comes to checking the assessment. How will students learn if we keep doing that? Okay, that's the question. Kaya later we will discuss about the role of the teacher in doing these forms of assessment. Kasi meron mga roles na dapat gawin ng tama, na dapat gawin ng mga guro ng tama, kapag i-integra niya ang mga iba't ibang klase, mga iba't ibang anyo ng assessment na tinatalakay natin ngayon. Okay, that's a good point, Jobin. May mga nakikita rin ako mga teachers na gumagawa niyan, pero dapat hindi.
Para kasi may ginagawa na kasi pong practice ng mga teachers yung mga ganun. Pero I'm not saying no, sir, na lahat sila but some teachers are.
Certainly may mga ganun. Okay, dahil gusto nga nila ipasa ang estudyante. Okay, pero passing the student, even the student didn't learn anything, is adding more jeopardy to student learning. Okay, alam mo yan ang problema ngayon yan. Di ba, for example, sa basic education, for example, pero hindi naman nila lahat. Dahil meron patakaran ng DepEd, halimbawa, na dapat walang estudyante babagsak sa klase, na dapat ang mga estudyante ay tataas ng antas. At kung sakaling merong babagsak, magsa-summer class itong si teacher na kailangan turuan niya yung estudyante. Eh, syempre kung ako si teacher, bakit ako magsa-summer? Eh di papasa ko na sa estudyante. Ngayon, pinasapasan nila ang mga estudyante. Nung dumating sa koleyo, maraming mahihinang mga estudyante sa koleyo. Saan nag-uugat yung kahinaan nila? Dahil pinasa sila na dapat hindi sila pumasa nung sa basic education nila. That's a chain of problem already. Okay? Which we have to learn. Which we have to learn as teachers. Which you have to learn as future teachers. Okay, so, thank you for letting that, for sharing that experience. Yes, Jobin.
Sir, why did the university consider yung pagpasa ng students upon completion of the task during our summer class, sir?
Yan, okay. Ito, bakit inalaw iyon? Actually, ako rin eh. Meron dapat babagsak sa klase ko. Kaso, inalaw yan nung short term, was it short term or second semester, no? Inalaw yan nung second semester because of the new normal, because of an unforeseen situation. And that unforeseen situation is we shifted to online learning even if, okay, there are still many things to prepare about such modality. Kaya parang sa human sa impact niya sa humanity, okay, kumbaga sa compassion and others, walang estudyante na ibabagsak, kundi bigyan lang sila ng pagkakataon, okay, na kompletuhin ang assessment task para mabigyan sila ng passing grade. Parang gano'n na naging contention, parang naging gano'n ang desisyon. Naging gano'n ang desisyon, ulitin ko, dahil nga we are caught in a difficult situation. Okay, but for short term, I think, and now, medyo strict na ngayon. Kasi we are actually learning how to do things already in an online learning modality.
Okay po, sir.
Okay. But I like your sharing, Jopin. Okay? Later, pag maging guru na kayo, pag maging lisensyadong guru na kayo, later, do not do that. Do not just pass the student because you would just like to pass them. You pass the students because you know that they have learned something from your class. You pass the students because you know that they have progressed in your class, not because you just want them to pass. Okay,
Okay.
or else we are not employing, we are not utilizing the supposed appropriate use of assessment for assessment as an assessment of learning. Thank you, Jovin, for that sharing. Yes, Michael.
Sir?
Ay,
Ah, sige, sige, Michael.
Sige, si Michael muna, then after Michael, we listen to Divine.
din sir, may dugtong lang ako kay Jovin.
Yes, Michael.
Sir, may na-experience lang kasi ako nung high school, sir. Meron kasing teacher na, na may isang bagsak sa kanya, tapos, ang ginawa niya is pinasa niya na lang. Kasi ang rason niya is, doon sa bagsak na yon is marami pa siyang gagawing report. So, para hindi na siya magturo ng summer, sabi niya, is
Oh.
ipapasa na lang yung student. Ganun yung na-experience ko na high school.
Yeah, actually, that is happening in some, but not all, no. In some basic education, public schools, in basic education units. Okay, yeah, because they fear to report during summer. They fear to have additional burden during summer to meet this field students and to reteach and to do reteaching to these students. Okay, they're doing that. Kaya nga minsan kahit gaano ka-effort ang guro, kahit gaano kagana ang guro na na magturo, kung yung mismong sistemang pang-edukasyon na binibigay ng national government ay hindi siya ganun kakalidad, wala ring mangyayari.
Hey, sir.
Okay?
Hello, sir.
Yes, Michael.
Sir, kapag kapag halimbawa nagkakaroon ng mga bagsak may naibabagsak wait. Halimbawa sa klase ng isang teacher, sir, meron siyang mga bagsak na estudyante. Nababawasan ba yung performance nung ano ba yun? Narinig ko kasi dati yun, sir.
Yan yung
Na-edit na kasi yata sila.
Tama, Michael. Yan yung practice sa DepEd. Okay, merong bawas yan doon sa kanilang, may bawas siya doon sa kanilang performance evaluation. Na yun ang hindi maganda. Dahil may bawas siya sa performance evaluation, kahit sa teacher, ipapasa na lang yung mga estudyante na dapat bagsak. Yun ang sinasabi ko sa sistema natin ngayon. Na dapat yan ang i-review, yan dapat ang irepaso ng mga officials ng DepEd na tignan nila. Kasi hindi porke may bumagsak sa klase ay ibig sabihin na hindi na epektibo siguro. Siguro i-identify lang nila yung percentage ng failure. Okay? Pero kung may isang bagsak, bawas ka agad sa kanyang performance evaluation, that is not fair. That is not really fair. Because failing a student in class, okay, does not necessarily mean that teachers are not teaching well. Okay? So dapat yung titignan din ng DepEd, yung sa kanilang polisiya.
Thank you po, sir.
Michael, we listen now to Divine.
Sir?
Yes, Divine.
Morning, sir. Sir, medyo nahihirapan kasi akong i-differentiate lahat yung assessment for, assessment at, as assessment of. So, sir, lang sana ako nung main clue nung tatlo kung paano ko sila pagkakaibahin. Sir, kasi parang nalito din ako kanina sir dun sa process dun sa assessment for, tsaka strategies doon sa assessment as. Parang medyo hindi ko alam kung parang hirap pag i-differentiate, sir.
Pag sinabi natin assessment of learning, everything that we do, all tasks that we as students do, all tasks that we do as teachers in preparation for the summative assessment. Ito yung quiz na tinatawag natin. Ito yung test na tinatawag natin. Halimbawa tayo, bago ako nagpa-quiz sa inyo, di ba maalala nyo, bago ako nagpa-quiz sa inyo, meron muna tayong dalawang ginawang learning task. And this learning task is in preparation for that quiz. At nag-discuss pa tayo. The discussion I did is an example of assessment for learning. Because all this task is for the student preparation for a good score, for better score in a summative assessment, which is a good score assessment. Okay, that is assessment for learning. Assessment as learning is any strategy that would help learners assess or check their own learning progress. Halimbawa, itong online learning natin, marami kayong mga assessments sa different subjects. Gumawa kayo ng sarili nyong calendar. Gumawa kayo ng sarili nyong to-do checklist. Gumawa kayo ng sarili nyong rubric para matapos yung mga para matapos yung mga learning tasks na ito. That is an example of assessment as learning. It's you as the learner imposing yourself, doing something for yourself to learn better the course or to learn to have a better learning of the material. That is assessment as learning. When we say assessment of learning, it's already the culmination, the end of a topic, the end of a course, the end of a unit of study, and that end is being culminated by a certain test, paper and pencil test, or performance test, or demonstrative test, and others. So for you to check whether the learning outcomes have already been achieved, the learning expectations have already been achieved by the student or not.
Sir, example sa assessment for sir, pre-test yung ganun, sir?
Yes, pre-test is assessment 4. Kasi
And then yung
prior knowledge nila.
Okay, sir. Then yun yung sir, yun yung strategy mo na, sir, na as a student. Then dun sa assessment of, sir, example is examination, sir?
Yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification, and I hope others are also clarified as regards the question. Kasi later on, gagawa ko ng assessment timeline. Yun yung team activity ninyo to differentiate these three forms of assessment. And thank you, Divine, for asking that because you are helping your classmates also to get clarified as regards to the differences of these forms of assessment. Okay, thanks, Divine. Any other question?
Sir, last. So,
yes,
so parang lang din, sir, may level lang din tong assessment, tong tatlo, sir, no? Parang level 1, level 2, parang ganun ba, sir?
Correct. Parang leveling siya. Parang ito muna yung gagawin mo bago mo gawin ito. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Sabi natin na you cannot proceed to the quiz without giving students a preparatory task for them to get good scores for the quiz. Parang ganon. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other question? Good morning, Jobert. Jamila. There's a question from Jamila, and Jamila said, Sir, how can students advance their learning if teachers keep on giving them the same kind of assessment without providing them any descriptive feedback? For example, sir, essay. That's very true. That's why I just posted a note about classroom assessment in my Facebook account last night after a conversation with a student, Jamila, because students are commenting, students are giving feedback. The teachers keep giving assessment tasks but have never provided them of the results of the assessment they just have completed. Kaya nga napakahalaga na ibinibigay natin ng resulta ng kahit anumang gawain pagkatuto ng kompleto ng ating mga mag-aaral nang sa ganon ay matulungan sila kung paano pa nila maunawaan, kung paano pa nila mapagyaman ang kanilang pag-unawa sa nasabing paksang aralin. Pero ito yung problema ngayon, that's why it's very difficult to be a teacher. Hindi ko naman sisisi mga teachers sa iba kung bakit hindi nila nagagawang magbigay ng on-time feedback, on-time score sa mga assessment ng kompleto ng mga estudyante. Dahil nga siguro din masyadong maraming mga subjects. Imagine 8 preps ng teachers, for example. 8 preparations ng teachers. 8 classes ang teacher. Isang subject lang sabihin natin yan. Kung 50 ang estudyante sa bawat klase, 50 times 8, you have 400, tama ba? 50 times 8, ilan? 400 ba? 400 students? Wala ako sa math. Okay? 400 students, halimbawa ang estudyante mo, tapos mag-check ka and others, yun ang mahirap. Okay? But ideally, tama ka, Jamila, ideally, teachers have to provide timely feedback, timely score to students' completed assessment tasks, to students' completed learning tasks. Okay? Kaya nga ako pinag-dress ako ang sarili ko. Hindi ako magbibigay ng quiz. That's how I impose myself. That is self-learning also for me. That is self-assessment also for me. I impose to myself that I will not give my students, I will not conduct any quiz unless I am to check the completed learning tasks, the completed learning outputs of my students. Because that's the only way, that's the only strategy that I could also give myself to ensure that I'm providing timely feedback for my students. And similarly, okay, similarly, this has always been a challenge to all teachers now. Okay? Lalo na highly evidence-based ang online learning natin, no? Lahat dapat ay magawa, lahat dapat ay ganito and ganyan. Okay? But certainly, that is not a good practice. If you keep giving assessment to your students but you never have returned scores, you have never returned your feedback as regards to assessment, that is not a good practice. Thank you, Jamila, for bringing that out. Sabi ni Claire, sir, under methods po, in mathematics subject, if the teacher asks students to use any formula as long as they get the right answer, is it under assessment 4 or assessment as learning? Okay. Is it under assessment 4 or assessment as learning? If, okay, if that activity is done prior to a summative test, prior to a quiz or a test, then that is assessment for learning. But if that activity is done after the lesson has been discussed and that activity has been done as a quiz for them, then that is assessment of learning. Assessment as learning is about knowing how you think, knowing how you do things, knowing your learning style. Okay? Yung actually yung paggamit ng bagong formula, that is actually one way that the student is showing how he or she could apply, okay, what he learned in another context. Hence, papasok yan sa assessment of learning dapat. Okay? Of learning dapat siya. Kasi parang it's an opportunity for the student, ipinakita, pinamalas ng estudyante kung paano niya ilapat ang konsepto sa panibagong konteksto. Ayan yung panibagong formula o panibagong solution para para makuha yung tamang sagot. Okay? But
Hindi ba yun, sir? Ay, sorry. Hindi ba parang strategy mo yun, sir? Yung paggawa mo ng sarili mong formula, sir?
Estratehiya siya yung paggawa ng sariling estratehiya, formula siya, no? Para paggawa ng sariling estratehiya, okay? That is actually assessment as learning siya. Okay, para mapadali niya yung nasabing solusyon. Pero, depende doon sa timeline kung kailan mo gagamitin. Okay? Kaya nga sabi natin na pwede siyang for learning, pwede siyang as learning, pwede siyang of learning. Nakadepende sa kung saan bahagi ng talakayan mo gagamitin yung nasabing estratehiya, yung nasabing pamamaraan mo. Okay? For example, tinanong mo sila kung ano yung dati na nilang alam kung paano i-compute, kung paano hanapin ang tamang sagot dito bago mo discuss yung lesson. At nagsabi sila ng sarili ng formula, that is actually diagnostic assessment. And that can fall under assessment for learning. Nung habang nag-discuss ka, may discover si estudyante na panibagong paraan kung paano niya mabigyan ng solusyon yung problema, that is assessment as learning. Kasi nakapag-identify siya ng sarili niyang estratehiya. Ibig sabihin, nabigyan siya ng pagkakataon na alamin ang sarili niyang estratehiya. Pero nung sinabi mo after discussing the lesson, sinabi mo na I would like you class to compute or to answer this problem by devising a new strategy, a new solution on how to do it, then papasok siya as assessment of learning. Okay, klaro?
Yes po, sir.
Okay, so nakadepende siya, no? Please do not be confused. There are activities, there are learning tasks that may fall under these three, okay, forms of assessment. Pero nakadepende iyon kung kailan mo siya gagamitin. Okay? Kaya nga timeline ng tawag, no? Kaya nga gagawa kayo ng timeline later. Okay, ng assessment timeline. Okay? Any other question? No more, we continue our discussion. Okay, sorry, it's 11:53. We will continue this next meeting, but for the meantime, allow me to explain your task. Okay, kasi pwede nyo nang simulan siya pero may improve na lang later until Saturday. Okay, because this is a team task. Okay, so we continue that next meeting. Allow me to share the activity that you will be doing. Okay, so ito yung activity ninyo. Sorry. Window, share, this one, classes assessment of learning. Okay, so ito ang assessment timeline. Okay, gagawa kayo ng assessment timeline, and this is the worksheet that you are to complete. Okay, study the rubric. Here's the rubric. Okay, ano yung sa rubric? Ito yung rubric na gagamitin natin. Purpose, description, and collaboration. You are to create an assessment timeline. What do we mean by purpose? Okay, make sure that all assessment tasks that you would identify as an example for each form of assessment support each of the 3 forms of assessment. Okay, that is 15 points. You have to describe each assessment task that you would devise for each form of assessment. All assessment tasks are appropriately described. That is 10 points. 10 points, yeah. Then collaboration is all members collaborate for quality output as evidenced by recorded team discussion. Okay, so dapat naka-record ang inyong discussion about identifying examples of assessment tasks for each form of assessment. Ito yung teams natin, okay? So per major po ito, no? Per major po, we have 8 teams, okay? Merong iba na 4 ang members, meron naman yung iba na 3 ang members kasi nga mahirap i-distribute kasi per major ang activity. Okay? So ito, ang team 1 ay mga ito. Sagot lang. Members of team 1 ay Jovins, Benjamin, Wendy, and Jan Isaiah. May I request Jovins to be the leader of this team. Jovins, bali ito ang gagamitin ninyo. You post your announcement here in this team. You post your discussion here. Okay, you do a discussion thread here for you to do your output. Okay, so Jovins is the leader of the first team. Second team, we have the following. Members are Ron Matthew, Richard David De Ocampo, and Romel Juan. May I request Richard to be the leader of this team? Dito kayo mag-discuss, Richard. Okay? Next team is Team 3. Team 3 members are the following: Yvette, Joanne, and Wenzel. Okay, may I request Joanne Dulin to please be the leader of this team. Joanne, you make use of this part to discuss your work. Next, Team 4, we have the following. Tama ba? Team 4 ba yun? Team 4 na ba tayo? O Team 3? Okay, so tama. Team 4, we have Team 4, we have the following members: Jamila, Mary Joy, and Jovert. May I request Jovert to be the leader of this team. Okay, you pause your discussion here. Next, we have Team 5. We have the following: Charlemagne, Lovernil, Jayap, Cielago, Annabel Tabua. May I request Lovernil to be the team leader or team captain of this team. You pause your discussion here. Next, we have Team 6. Team 6 are the following: Ira K, Brenda, and Michael. May I request Michael to be the leader of this team. Okay, Michael, you will be the leader of this team. You pause your discussion here. Next, Team 7. Team 7 are the following: Joed, Divine, and Ria. May I request Divine to be the leader of this team. You pause your discussion here. And we have Team 8. We have the following: Ashel, Claire, Rencart, and John Heinrich. May I request John Heinrich to be the leader of this team. You pause your discussion here. Okay? Anong kukumpletuhin ninyo? You complete this. Nakikita niyo assessment timeline? Hindi. Nakikita niyo? Hindi.
Opo,
No,
sir.
sir.
Ah,
Ay,
hindi?
hindi.
Sige, stop ko lang.
Yung dinownload mo, sir?
Hindi, saglit.
Sir, wait lang. Kan ipopost ng leader sa announcements pa or sa post pa?
Dun sa i-check yung team, tapos dun kayo magpo-post. Sa
Sir,
per team ninyo, nabigyan ko ng
paano yung
Okay, saglit
record
lang.
na sinasabi mo, sir?
Yun, through posting your discussion thread
Dun
in
sa
your
LMS,
team,
sir.
that's recording your collaboration, okay?
Ay, okay po, sir. Sige po, sir.
So, i-share ko sa inyo ito ang I'll share to you this worksheet. Ito yung worksheet na kompletuhin ninyo. Nakikita na ninyo? Nakikita na?
Yes, sir.
Opo.
Okay, so ito po yung worksheet. You have to select a unit of study in your course. Okay, in your major, unit of study. For example, theories of movement, parang ganon, sa PE. Okay, so gagawa kayo, mag-isip kayo ng assessment task for formative assessment, assessment for learning, for assessment as learning, and for assessment of learning. Tapos, ilagay niyo yung purpose. Anong purpose ng activity na ito? Purpose ng activity na ito? Purpose ng activity na ito? Then, describe ninyo. Pag sabi ko you describe, explain ninyo kung ano yung gagawin ng estudyante. Okay? Description sa baba. Okay?
Okay po, sir.
So, leaders, I would like you to, for the leaders, I would like you to identify one person in your team to submit. Okay, to submit, to upload your completed worksheet. Okay, isa lang dapat sa bawat team ang mag-upload ng kanilang worksheet. Ang sinasabi ko na recorded collaboration ay yung paggamit ng inyong team. Di ba pag makita niyo assessment, merong teams diyan, tama?
Opo, sir.
Okay, so i-give ko na ngayon pala yung activity. Okay. Okay, so tingnan natin yung view. View natin as we view this as a student para makita niyo kung paano. Okay, kunwari ako si Charlemagne, I'll view it as a student. So ito makikita ni Charlemagne. Okay. Okay. So, saan yun? View assessment. Okay. So I'm viewing as, tama ba to? Tama ba? View as a teacher. Tama. View as a student. So makikita ni Charlemagne itong mga ito. Punta ako sa assessment timeline. Okay. It's a team activity. So you prepare an answer. Okay. You click prepare and, sorry. Not this. Sorry. Okay, ito ano sabi dito na dito niyo i-upload yung sagot, no? Kahit isa lang sa inyo mag-upload ito, gamitin niyo itong upload file. Pag makompleto na ninyo yung add attachment, ganyan pala, add attachment, pag makompleto na ninyo yung worksheet. Kahit isa lang sa inyo magpasa niyaan. Pero ang sinasabi ko na discussion, ano makikita niyo dyan na ano, teka lang, saan ba natin makikita? Yan. Okay. Assessment timeline, discuss, this rubric.
Hindi ba sa forum, sir?
Submit lang. No, not in the forum. Kasi merong, learning conversation yan. Saan na ba yun? Ba't bigla ako nakalimutan?
Sir, parang di mo na-indicate. Parang di mo sinali, sir.
Saan ko
Yung
discuss?
discussion, sir.
Sige, check ko. Hindi, kasi ano siya, team activity kasi siya. So, for example, ano makikita niyo? Makikita niyo ba ang teams dyan? Sa ano nyo, LMS nyo?
So, yung katim lang namin.
Katim lang ninyo makikita nyo?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ito ba nakikita nyo? Meron kayo nakikita ganito?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Kanina nung pag-open namin.
Nakikita nyo to?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Pag-post ang discussion nyo, ha? So, pag mag-post kayo, diyan kayo mag-post para makita ko na nagko-collaborate kayo that you are discussing, ha?
Ay, so parang chat box lang siya, sir.
Parang chat box lang siya, oo.
Okay, then.
Diyan kayo mag-uusap kung paano nyo gagawin, paano nyo kukompletuhin yung worksheet.
Okay, sir.
Sir, pwede lang kami mag-Tagalog dyan.
Yes, no problem. Yes, no problem. Wala naman nakalagay doon na grammar na di ba, na criteria.
Sige po, sir.
Wala namang grammar na nakalagay doon. Basta importante, okay yung grammar ninyo doon sa doon sa worksheet, ha? So you assign one.
Yes po,
You
sir.
assign one as a recorder and someone to complete the worksheet based from your discussion. Okay? Leaders, ha, please be reminded, ha? Okay, so I would like you to, this is one way for me to develop your collaborative skill. So please make the most of it in discussing it with your members, okay?
Okay po, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so thank you. And I really love the class because you keep, parang wala pa nagpasa ng assessment na late kasi talagang ginagawa ninyo on time yung ating mga activities. Okay? Our last quiz will be on Tuesday next week because after that is the prelim exam. Your second quiz and last quiz for prelims will be on Tuesday next week. About
Sir, kailan pong exam, sir?
exam natin ay Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday as calendar.
Oh my God.
So as calendar, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, please abangan na lang ninyo kung kailan yung inyong exam sa assessment. Okay? Any
po, sir.
other question? Please take note. This meeting is recorded. I'll upload the recorded discussion later in the LMS para mag-view ninyo. Okay?
Sir, next week, Wednesday or next week yung exam, sir?
Next week, that is,
22?
teka lang.
23 to.
MW,
20, 21,
23.
23.
MW pala tayo, no?
TTH,
next
sir.
At tickets pa tayo, o next week, Tuesday.
Next week na yung exam.
Tuesday next week, kasi exam ng Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Okay. Akala ko, sir, next week pa yung exam, sir.
Hindi, ang exam ay next week na.
Okay, sir.
So please prepare well. Ang gawin ninyo, ha, ganito ang sekreto para may pasa ninyo ang prelim exam. I-review ninyo lahat ng quizzes natin, i-review din ninyo lahat ng mga learning tasks natin. Okay? At the same time, you review all our discussions, sa mga recorded discussions natin because certainly maraming lalabas tungkol doon, ha? Okay. Okay? So thank you for attending our class. Have a nice day and keep safe always.
Thanks, sir. Bye, sir.
Bye.